Hello again. Now this week we're going to look at objects which bear a maker's mark only. There are lots of them about and they can be confusing and intriguing and cause all sorts of difficulties for problems, quite understandable ones. But I want to give you three examples, one's a bit earlier than the other two, of objects that I've bought, and I'm going to show you them first and tell you what they're described to me as when I bought them. The most recent purchase, only a week or so ago, is this little bowl. And it's got 4 maker's marks, same maker's mark, repeated 4 times on the base, and that was sold as being possibly Turkish, late 19th century. Then there was this tablespoon, Old English pattern, nice little bit of engraving there, nice initials, with 3 maker's marks struck on the back, and that was sold actually in the Spoon Club auction as being by William Hannay of Paisley, Scottish Provincial. And then delving deep into the mists of time, there is this rather splendid inkstand which I covet enormously, just in case you were thinking of making me an offer, and that has 4 impressions of the same maker's mark on the back of it, and that was sold to me as being by a London goldsmith. And I will point out, although we'll touch on this in a little bit later, that 3 of these impressions have been overstruck by the same mark, making them difficult to read, so you can only actually see one of them. Right, so there you go. So that all seems quite straightforward, doesn't it? Nothing is straightforward in the world of antique silver. That's what people on the television make you want to believe. Let us look first at the bowl. Now, this little bowl turned up in an auction, and yes, the maker's mark on the bottom, which I'll try and hove into view for you. You can see 4 times on the base. Does look a little bit, it's squiggly. It looks a little bit Arabic. So there is a passing similarity between that and a Turkish mark called a tugra, which is actually the Sultan's mark, which is really a sort of handful of squiggles, if that isn't too offensive to any Arabic calligraphers out there. So I understand why that happened. There isn't anything else on this or about this that to the untrained eye would immediately tell you it was anything other than that. However, when you get a maker's mark struck 4 times on the base of something, it's usually for a reason. Now, the main reason was that a duty was imposed on silver in 1720. We'd had the Britannia standard. They'd raised the standard of silver to stop people changing currency into objects and then leaving the country short of money. That proved unpopular. It lasted over 20 years, but it proved unpopular. So the sterling standard was reinstated, but the cost of that, if you like, the punitive measure to still discourage people turning coinage into silver, was they would pay a duty of 6p per ounce. This meant that a lot of goldsmiths tried to get round that by not having their wares assayed. They wouldn't send them in for marking. What they would do is strike their maker's mark 4 times, often on the base of objects or sides or wherever it would be. You see it with flatware. Often they will try to disguise 3 of those punches, so it's difficult to tell that they aren't hallmarks that have been badly struck. But in this case, it's quite obvious. Two of the marks are partially struck, but it's quite obvious to see who the maker's mark is. It's for a well-known London goldsmith called Gabriel Sleeth, and he made all manner of hollow wares, domestic hollow wares, and this is either a small sugar bowl lacking its cover or possibly the base of a soap box, but normally these soap boxes have much deeper rims there because the covers are want to pop off otherwise. So I think all this is a sort of a bachelor's, if you like, sugar bowl. It's useful. We can date it from the when the Maker's Mark was used. It was used from 1739 up to 1753, when Sleeth formed a partnership with another goldsmith, and then he died in 1756. So we can date it to 14 years. It is what we call a duty dodger, in as much as, even though it was made during the reign of George II, it was made by Sleeth, it was made in London, we know all of that, he did not submit it for assay. He simply manufactured it and struck his mark 4 times on the base. So this is the first important thing. Often, if you think you've got some desperately rare piece of provincial silver because it doesn't have London assay marks on it, that is not the case, because during this period, and this duty on silver was applied up to 1758. So from 1720 to 1758, in London, there was an enormous incentive for duty dodgers, and that's what they're called. After 1758, anyone who dealt in silver had to have a licence, which cost them £2 annually, and also anyone that held large quantities of plate was due to pay a charge on the ownership of that, which was often administered for them by various goldsmiths. But we won't get into that. But that replaced it. But then in 1784, the duty came back, probably because of lots of sharp practices, and that was accompanied with a duty mark. So there really was, after 1784, no way round it. So after that date, you do not tend to get duty dodgers. You may still have items that are made in London and struck 4 times with a Maker's Mark. Sometimes they are just replacements for sets. Sometimes it's just the goldsmith hasn't bothered to send them in for assay. Or they may have been for their personal use. That was also allowed. You could strike an object just with your Maker's Mark if it was for your personal use and you're a working goldsmith. So there are numerous reasons. So don't get madly excited if you see something with just a Maker's Mark struck several times, because sometimes that means it's American, sometimes it means it's provincial or colonial, and those things can be worth dramatically more money. But Turkish 19th century, that ain't. And it's actually a lovely little George II bowl. So knowing that, it was worthwhile. I managed to buy a very nice little piece of handmade domestic Georgian silver. So that's quite lovely. Now, just as I've told you all of that, dismiss it, because this was sold to me exactly with somebody thinking just like that. A duty dodger, something struck with the Maker's Mark 4 times, you can see it on the back of that, to evade the duty. In this instance, rather excitingly, this is not the case. There is another circumstance where a Maker's Mark is struck 4 or even 5 times provincially, and that is to imitate London hallmarks when you are not working in London, when you are working provincially. So this is actually by a very rare maker, Thomas Howell of Bath, and it is a genuine piece of Bath silver. And to testify to that, I've traced the crest, and that's the Page family of Holbrook in Somerset. And people forget that Bath, at the end of the 18th century, was an extremely fashionable and extremely wealthy area. And lots of goods, lots of silver was either brought in and retailed there or manufactured there. And a substantial amount of it wasn't submitted for assay in London, although some of it was. Howell did have his mark registered in London, and there are unknown marks in Grimwade which I am confident are actually unrecorded marks which were Howell's, because of a long story which I won't go into now, but they are also Howell's mark. And he basically sold a mix of things. He sold things that had come in from London that were fully hallmarked, and he appended his mark to them, or, as in the case of this, he either made this himself, although this is very, very similar to some of the work that's being produced in the Midlands before the Birmingham Assay Office was established. And I wonder if that might have come down the River Severn and ended up in Bath somehow for him to retail. But in this instance, the maker's mark is shown clearly once, and the other three marks are obfuscated simply by overstriking them. He struck his mark, he's then turned the punch the other way around, struck it again, so you can't quite see it, but you can if you know what you're looking for. So this is an example which is completely contrary to what I've just told you about this being London. This is Provincial. This is enormously rare piece of Bath silver. So that can be a maker's mark on its own. It gets confusing, doesn't it? And then we get to this. Now, this was confidently identified in the Spoon Club auction, which a venerable auction indeed. And we've got 3 marks, WH 3 times. And if you look that mark up in a lot of books, you will probably come to the conclusion it is William Hannay of Paisley. So this is another thing that happens. A lot of Scottish provincial makers just strike a maker's mark several times. Lots of American silversmiths just strike a maker's mark. Although I will say that on spoons, American goldsmiths tend to strike their mark once, usually towards the bottom, and usually it's a full name letter punch. But even if it's initials, it tends to be struck once, and hollowware tends to be struck twice. 3 times, and you start to think, is it Scottish? Is it colonial? Because three marks in succession is a very un-American thing to do. In this case, and the reason that I paid staggeringly more than the estimate in the auction for this is in fact not by William Hannay of Paisley. This, and I wouldn't have known a couple of months ago, but because research on silver is always ongoing, and because there was a symposium on West Indian silver at Goldsmiths Hall, which I attended virtually, I'm happy to say I can tell you that with certainty and with some small amount of pride, which will soon be beaten out of me, that this is in fact not Scottish, but is by William Horsham of Barbados, and it is a very, very rare piece of Barbados silver made in around 1780. And again, maker's mark just struck 3 times. So there are 3 instances of objects that were not what they appeared to be, but they had maker's mark struck on them 3 times. That was sold as Turkish, it's London. That was sold as London, it's Bath. That was sold as Scottish, and it's from Barbados. I don't want to discourage you or send you a sense of fear. I think objects that are marked maker's mark only are fascinating. But do be aware that even in well-educated circles, that was from an auction. That was from a very good dealer who'd been dealing for 40 years. And that was from, one of my fellow spoon collectors. God bless you, whoever you are. Mistakes happen. We all make them, but they are more likely to be made on objects that bear just a maker's mark, often in succession, 3 or 4 times. But remember, and these are the key points, don't immediately think it's provincial. It could be and may well be a London duty dodger. After that, think that it might be English provincial, imitating those marks seen in London. Beyond that, start to think it might be Scottish, and if it's got a 2 or 1 maker's mark, it might be American. But then also there is the sort of holy grail, it might be colonial as well. It might be obscure colonial, it could be Australian, it could be West Indian, it could be Cape. all of which are keenly sought after and very valuable. So I hope that's inspired you. This is a very, very brief video on an extremely large topic, Maker's Mark only. People have studied them all their lives and never got to the bottom of them. But that's a taster, so go out and have a look and be circumspect when you're looking. Don't get caught out, but it is fun. This is why we do this. It is fun. That's why I do it. That and to preserve my mental health. So until next week, good antiques hunting and goodbye.